Hello, welcome to another speaking exercise from Influent.com. In this exercise, you're going to practice asking questions in English. Let's get started with the exercise. Now you're going to ask questions about Jane, Jim, and Jack. Let's start with Jim. This is how Jim looks today, and this is how he looked a year ago. Alright, let's begin. Jim is not fat. Is Jim fat? No, he isn't. He is thin. Is he thin? Yes, he is. He's thin. He wasn't thin a year ago. Was he thin a year ago? No, he wasn't. He wasn't thin a year ago. He was fat a year ago. Was he fat a year ago? Yes, he was. He was fat a year ago. Somebody was fat a year ago. Who was fat a year ago? Jim. Jim was fat a year ago. He used to be fat. Did he used to be fat? Yes, he did. He used to be fat. Somebody used to be fat. Who used to be fat? Jim. Jim used to be fat. He was fat a year ago. When was he fat? Well, he was fat a year ago. Okay, now please ask questions about Jane. This is how she looks today. And this is how she looked a year ago. Jane is fat. Is Jane fat? Yes, she is. She used to be thin. Did she used to be thin? Yes, she did. She used to be thin. She was thin a year ago. When was she thin? Well, she was thin a year ago. Was she thin a year ago? Yes, she was. She was thin a year ago. She is fat today. Is she fat today? Yes, she is. She's fat today. She used to be thin. Did she used to be thin? Yes, she did. She used to be thin. She was thin a year ago. When was she thin? Well, she was thin a year ago. Now you're going to ask questions about all of them. So this is how they look today. And this is how they looked a year ago. Jane was thin a year ago. Was Jane thin a year ago? Yes, she was. She was thin a year ago. Somebody was thin a year ago. Who was thin a year ago? Well, it was Jane. Jane was thin a year ago. Jim and Jack were fat a year ago. Were Jim and Jack fat a year ago? Yes, they were. Jim and Jack were fat a year ago. Jim and Jack weren't fat a week ago. Were Jim and Jack fat a week ago? No, they weren't fat a week ago. They were fat before that. When were they fat? Well, they were fat a year ago. They weren't thin a year ago. Were they thin a year ago? No, they weren't. They were fat. They aren't fat today. Are they fat today? No, they aren't. They aren't fat today. Jane isn't thin. Is Jane thin? No, she isn't. She used to be thin. Did she used to be thin? Yes, she did. She used to be thin. Jim and Jack weren't thin a year ago. Were Jim and Jack thin a year ago? No, they weren't thin a year ago. Jim and Jack were fat a year ago. Were Jim and Jack fat a year ago? Yes, they were. They were fat a year ago. Somebody was fat a year ago. Who was fat a year ago? Well, it was Jim and Jack. Jim and Jack were fat a year ago. Jane used to be thin. Did Jane used to be thin? Yes, she did. She used to be thin. Jim and Jack were fat a year ago. When were Jim and Jack fat? Well, Jim and Jack were fat a year ago. This is the end of the exercise. Repeat this exercise until you can ask every question easily. Thanks for using this exercise to improve your spoken English, and I'll see you next time.